Welcome to Creative Imperfections, the podcast where perfection is overrated and messy magic gets the spotlight. I'm so glad you're here. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Creative Imperfections. Apparently, I like to talk about things that most creatives don't talk about out loud. Something that I want to talk about today is something that we don't talk about very often, and mostly because it's usually subtle, it's sneaky. It's something that doesn't arrive with flashing warning lights or dramatic breakdowns. It's quiet. It settles in slowly. It's that moment when the thing you once loved, the thing that energized you, inspired you, and made time disappear, starts to feel heavy. Not devastatingly heavy, not crisis heavy, but pressurized. Suddenly, that thing that you were so passionate about has deadlines attached to it, expectations wrapped around it, metrics measuring it, money tied to it, and consistency demanded from it. Somewhere along the way, your passion picked up a clipboard and now it's asking you to perform. And what makes this especially confusing is that you wanted this. This was your dream. You chose this path. So when it starts to feel like a weight instead of a spark, the guilt creeps in right alongside the pressure. I want to say this loud and clear because it matters. When your passion starts to feel like pressure, it doesn't mean you chose the wrong thing. It doesn't mean you're ungrateful or lazy or failing. More often than not, it simply means your passion grew up. And growth, inconveniently, comes with friction. If you think back to the early days before the stakes were high and before people were watching, your work felt different. You created because you wanted to, not because you needed it to succeed. You experimented without overthinking. You played without worrying about how it would land. There was no algorithm to satisfy, no audience to manage, no internal voice whispering that this had to work or else. It was all so much lighter then. And over time, responsibility quietly enters the room. And with responsibility comes pressure. Passion often turns into pressure when the joy slowly becomes obligation. When something that once invited you in with curiosity begins to demand results from you. And when creativity stops feeling like a place you visit and starts feeling like a place you're trapped in. That doesn't mean burnout has arrived, but it does mean the warning light is on. And most creatives ignore that light because we've been taught to push through, hustle harder, stay grateful, keep producing. The show must go on, right? The tricky part is that pressure doesn't usually come from the work itself. It comes from the meaning that we attach to it ourselves. We tell ourselves that this project has to succeed, that this career has to pay off, that this creative path has to prove we made the right choices or justify the sacrifices we've made along the way. That is a lot to ask of your passion. At that point, it's no longer just creativity, it's performance anxiety wearing a convincing disguise. Pressure also doesn't always show up as stress. Sometimes it shows up as avoidance. You don't want to start even though you care deeply. You procrastinate, scroll, overthink, nitpick because the weight of the expectation makes it feel safer not to even begin at all. That's not a lack of passion. That is passion carrying too much responsibility. So I want to offer you a reframe that can be grounding. When passion starts to feel like pressure, it's often asking for space, not abandonment. You don't need to quit everything, pivot your entire life, or dramatically burn it all down. More often, you just need to loosen your grip. Creativity is not a machine that runs indefinitely at full capacity. It's a living thing, and living things move in cycles. There are seasons of output and seasons of rest, periods of expansion and moments of contraction. Pressure builds when we expect ourselves to stay in constant output mode, ignoring the very rhythms that creativity depends on. One simple way to soften that pressure is to separate creation from outcome again, even if just temporarily. Create something with no intention of sharing it, posting it, monetizing it, or optimizing it. Let it exist just between you and the work. Not forever, but long enough to remind your nervous system that creativity can be safe again, that it doesn't always have to prove its worth. Another place pressure sneaks in is when our identity becomes tangled in our output. When success feels like self-worth, slow seasons feel like failure, and one day off starts to feel like a verdict on who we are. And that's way too much weight for any passion to carry. You are not your productivity. You are not your last result. You are not behind. You are human, and humans create best when they feel supported, not scrutinized. Sometimes passion feels heavy simply because you've outgrown the way you're doing it. The calling might still be right, but the container needs to change. The love can stay the same while the boundaries evolve. And that's not quitting, that's growth. So here's my challenge to you for this week. I want you to notice where your passion feels tight. Nothing too dramatic, just where it's tense. Ask yourself what expectation you quietly placed there without even realizing it. And then I want you to consider what might happen if you released that expectation, even just a little. A little less urgency, a little less proving, more permission to just create. Pressure absolutely does not mean the magic is gone. It usually means the magic needs some air. Creativity comes back when it feels invited rather than demanded. When you give it room to breathe instead of squeezing it for results. You don't need to fall back in love with your passion overnight. You just need to stop gripping it so tightly and allow it to meet you where you are again. That's where you can find the joy in your passions again. And always remember, there's magic in your imperfections. Go out there and find it. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of Creative Imperfections. If you have a friend who could use this advice right now, please feel free to share this with them and make sure you subscribe.